You're watching LiveOne.tv's Town Hall event with U.S. candidate for Senate in New York, DIANE SARE. SARE recently amassed more than 70,000 petition signatures, meaning her name will be on the ballot November 5th. Okay, it's exciting to have you here. We're not too far away from the November 5th election. Please tell us what your experiences have been going around New York State and anything else you'd like to tell our viewers and audience.
Well, I think I'll start that we're clearly in an increased war danger, and the intelligence, military industrial complex, whatever you want to call it, the extension of the British Empire in America, is on a tear. You are probably aware, as I hope some of our listeners are, that Tulsi Gabbard has been added to a TSA terror watch list called Quiet Skies. So she's been subjected to 45 minutes worth of searches and accompaniment by federal air marshals every time she flies anywhere. And the air marshals have been complaining because they find it so absurd to do these kind of, they're told to find out how many times does she brush her teeth? Does she change her clothes when she lands at the airport? I mean, just nonsense. The woman is a former congresswoman, former
I
president.
can't believe
Okay.
this story. I'm sorry, I'm behind in the news. You've got to tell us. Tulsi Gabbard, the congresswoman from Hawaii who served in the
Yes.
armed forces,
Yes.
she's on a terror watch list?
Yes, yes, yeah. And I think it has to do with the tweet. She's the one who finished off Kamala Harris in the debates in the 2020 elections because Kamala had such an outrageous record giving minor drug offenders maximum sentences, probably because she was getting money from the private prison complex. So Tulsi just destroyed her. But nonetheless, Biden chose her as his running mate. And then Tulsi was in Italy where she filmed a short statement just saying Kamala doesn't know anything about foreign policy. She's not fit to be president. And the next thing you know, she's on her way back home and she and her husband are stopped for lengthy searches at their transfer air flights. And then some federal air marshal whistleblowers go public and say she is on something called Quiet Skies, which is a program which really picked up steam after January 6th. And that whenever Tulsi flies anywhere, there are up to 6 federal air marshals, 3 at the airport, 3 on the flight, bomb sniffing dogs. She was wondering why it was so hard for her to get through security. And one of the TSA agent said, "Boy, this is really unusual. You have a military ID, but you're on this list that says we have to search you." Right? Because why would an active duty military person be planning to blow up an airplane? Obviously, she's not. And yes, she's a former congresswoman and a former presidential candidate. So this is really over the top. You're muted.
Who do you think is behind this? Is this maybe the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security or Mayorkas or somebody in the Biden administration, or maybe just a mistake?
It's not a mistake. It's the Democratic Party, which seems to be an outgrowth of all of these intelligence agencies. And I would say, I have to say, the British. Barack Obama is like this with Tony Blair. He met with him fairly recently, and apparently he's been advising Kamala to throw out the Biden people and replace them with Obama people. I didn't know there was a difference. But Eric Holder, Obama's former attorney general, the guy who said there was no legal problem with extrajudicial assassinations of American citizens with drones in Yemen and Pakistan. So Eric Holder was helping Kamala choose her vice presidential running mate. And this guy also ran the Fast and Furious program, where we were shipping very advanced weapons to Mexican drug gangs, which then were used to kill a number of American, I think, Border Patrol and other people in Arizona, the Fast and Furious.
Right. Can we just briefly, for people who are just tuning in, the Fast and Furious program happened during the Obama administration, where Eric Holder from the Bronx, New York, by the way, was our attorney general. and they okayed it for the Department of Justice to make sure that a bunch of weapons made their hands into drug cartel members in Mexico. The theory behind it was they would be able to track some of these weapons through their serial numbers. Instead, what ended up happening is these weapons were used to kill, I think, American agents who were pursuing them. So it was, one of the stupidest ideas in the world, if not outright criminal, and it's really hard to understand why they would have done it. But at any rate, so Tulsi Gabbard is unable to fly around the country safely right now, or at least she's being detained for hours.
Right. And then you have, as you heard, I'm sure, the 5.5 hour FBI raid of Scott Ritter's home in Bethlehem, New York, investigating whether he is a foreign. He's a foreign agent who was supposed to have registered because he was a paid journalist writing occasional articles for RT and Sputnik. They never tell him what to, Scott Ritter, nobody tells him what to write. He's very strong-willed and he's extremely patriotic, and he really takes offense at this, having been a U.S. Marine intelligence officer. He's an American patriot. So they sent apparently 30 to 40 agents to his home. They took dozens of boxes of files of his records from the time he was a UN weapons inspector in Iraq. And you'd say, if they're investigating whether Russia is deploying him illegally or something, he's an agent, why are they stealing all of his documentation on Iraq? And remember, they had revoked his passport a few weeks earlier. And then that night, his home was swatted, with the Bethlehem police getting a call that allegedly someone in the Ritter household was planning a mass shooting. And Scott said, luckily, he has a very good relationship with the Bethlehem police, so they did not come in guns blazing. But similar swatting incidents have not ended up so well. So I frankly think that he is in danger. He's on a Ukrainian kill list. That's what he identified as being the likely cause of this. And he didn't say this, but I will say Ukraine is losing the war. It's very clear. You have this little media explosion in Kursk where the Ukrainian army did surprise Russia. That was a big mistake on the part of the Russian command. They didn't think Ukraine was going to attack there, and they have quite a mess. But it doesn't change the outcome of the war. Russia will win. Russia is still moving between 5 to 8 kilometers per day in the Donetsk region. So they're making steady gains, but this gives the Ukrainian soldiers a big photo op. And right on cue, South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham is in Kiev. Now think about, Israel has totally leveled Gaza, killed maybe as many as 200,000 Palestinians by now, according to the Lancet Medical Journal. And you're not allowed to use the word genocide, even though the International Court of Justice found this plausible to describe what Israel is doing. I mean, you can literally see it's nothing but dust from satellite photographs. Then you have Russia's quote unquote invasion of Ukraine, what the Russians call a special military operation, and people are out partying and dancing in Kiev. Now, given Russia's military capability, if they wanted to flatten Ukraine, they could have done it in a week. They clearly, and it's secure enough that US senators can go, you know, uh, whatever the word is, galloping over there, giving press conferences where Lindsey Graham praised the Ukrainian operation, saying it was bold, brilliant, and beautiful. And he said it's about time we started sending those F-16 fighters. And he further called on all retired F-16 fighter pilots to go to Ukraine.
Yeah, I saw that. Incredible. And by the way, Lindsey Graham doesn't know how to gallop, even though he's from South Carolina. He's sashayed over there. Okay. But Diane,
Okay.
I'm really impressed with your world knowledge. You're not just a pretty spring tulip or something. You're worldly and you're informed on very serious matters. Tell us a little bit about your background. And I think that is a very good thing in terms of a senator because senators are involved in foreign policy so much.
Well, my background is that I come from a Quaker family in Maine, grew up in Maine, and unbeknownst to me while I was growing up, my father was actually very active in the civil rights movement. He then was drafted to serve in Vietnam. He went did medical work there. I met Lyndon LaRouche when he was on his way to prison in Massachusetts. He was running for the presidency, and given my Quaker upbringing, I thought if someone was in trouble with the federal agencies, they probably were doing something right. So the fact that they were saying all these outrageous things about LaRouche and he was on his way to jail got me quite interested, and I went to hear him speak. And all he was talking about was the question of economic justice, the usurious policies of the IMF, the World Bank, the fact that they were leading to mass death in, developing nations. And, I thought, I'm an American. I have more power, even though I'm not in office. I was a student at the time. But I said, as a US citizen, I have more power than a baby who is dying of malnutrition in Argentina in some ghetto. And I better hold my government accountable. And I decided to get active.
Yeah, and in the 2024 campaign here in New York, you're running against Kristen Gillibrand, who's been in office forever. You're also making great informative videos, both on TikTok, Instagram. You have your own website that I've seen, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. So these are very, very informative briefings that you're giving. I appreciate them. I know other people will too. You've got to see Diane's videos you're putting out.
Well, thanks a lot. And I also have to thank you for helping with some of them. You've done a number of really great videos that people appreciate. I know some of my friends are circulating them
Good.
widely.
Yes. Tell us a bit about, and then we've got questions here. We've got some people who are going to join us. I can see who are already in the audience online, and we have audience members here in the studio. Just before we get to them, because I know you only have a few minutes, tell us what it's like going around the state of New York. It is a big state, and there's so many different areas. What can you tell us about our state?
Well, there's a great deal of poverty. And, we just did the video about that. The child poverty in the state is
Shocking,
unbelievable. It
shocking.
is. New York State has 3 of the top 10 cities for child poverty, and Syracuse has more child poverty than the Bronx. So people really and I think even Albany might have a higher child poverty rate. That's where Kirsten Gillibrand is from. uh, the cities are disintegrating. You have Manhattan, which really should be a cultural hub with great opera, symphonies, museums, and instead we have a terrible crisis of drug addiction, mental illness. The city is in terrible disrepair. I was just today holding a press conference down at Beth Israel Hospital on the Lower East Side. This is a 799-bed hospital which was built in the 1890s. And then it was taken over by the Mount Sinai bunch of vultures who were on their board of trustees in 2013. And all they've done is asset strip the place. They've removed everything, the cardiology unit, the neonatal care unit, the various units that were generating some income. And now they've said, oh, Beth Israel isn't making a profit. It's costing us 160 million. We're going to have to shut it down. Well, where are these people going to get their medical care? This is going to increase the death rate, and it's really a horrible situation. The health workers we met when we were out in front of the hospital today were quite depressed. I heard that anxiety is running very high there from one of the union representatives. I was outside with I don't know if he's close to 100 years old, George Capsis, who founded the Westview newspaper, who had gone there for care and discovered that the ambulances aren't even bringing people there as part of the looting of the hospital. Virtually every room is empty. They're caring for very few people, preparing to shut it down. I think this is outrageous.
It is outrageous. Before we get to the questions, thank you for reminding me that New York should be a cultural hub. For over almost 400 years, we do have great theater, music, arts, and sciences, great museums. And thank you for reminding me of at least what it could be. You're right. All right, let's go to one of our
Now, I
first.
have to say, I
Yeah,
have 10 more minutes, so it's gonna have to
okay.
be real. Yeah,
All right, we'll go
okay,
to our first question here in the audience, and then we'll go to Bruce, who is waiting online. Let's
great.
go to our first question here, and please, I'll just give you the chair. I'd like to introduce Omar, who you've heard before. Omar has a question.
I do. Eating Diane again.
Hi, Omar, very good to see you.
Very good to hear from you. And praying for your win versus Kirsten Gillibrand. We need it desperately. But my question is on the subject of policy, and that in more toward the field of material sciences. I plan on becoming a truck driver Monday, but big concern, and you addressed it at one point, that bridges. I don't think there's one bridge in America that can hold over 50 tons, and that's a big issue for transport of heavy machinery, transformers, so on and so forth. So, as a matter of policy, what did you have in mind for the improvement and primarily updating of the current decrepit infrastructure in
Well, I'm
America?
glad you asked because you're
Thanks,
right.
Omar.
I did bring it up. I was on a conference call when I was running against Schumer with a group of 18-wheeler tractor trailer drivers. They told me they routinely drive hundreds of miles out of their way because the bridges on the main, wherever they were supposed to be going, the shortest route, cannot carry their load. So, as you may be aware, I'm supporting draft legislation written by one of my friends with LaRouche called the Swords to Plowshares Act of 2024, which calls for taking our whole military industrial complex and retooling it. These companies, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, Texas Instruments, everything that's being now used to produce weapons to kill people at frankly great physical economic loss, should be retooled to build modern infrastructure, high speed rail, nuclear power plants. Why don't we repair or rebuild or build entirely new bridges, tunnels, levees, dams? A lot of the dams in this country are way past their life expectancy, and people don't seem to be concerned that, there's people living downstream should the dam break. Um, Somehow money has become king, and I think there's a lot in the history of the great religions against worshiping the golden calf, worshiping mammon, but we've become a society that seems to put that over human life.
We have a question here from Bruce. Bruce, please welcome to Live1.tv and your chance to ask candidate Diane Sare a question.
Well, thank you. Just so you know, I was on Diane's balloting grouping to get her on the ballot, and had a very great 6-week time frame to doing that. But I did want to address or ask Diane a couple of things. One, in watching Kamala Harris the other night, she was taken aback by the demonstrators for on the Palestinian question. But there's also a uncommitted grouping across the country, and you've had with Robert Kennedy a clearly an attempt to, although it seems like not successfully now, but make inroads into the status quo. So I'd like Diane, if you could address any one of that or all of it, for the people viewing.
Well, on the Kamala Harris question, she's a fraud. She didn't show up when Bibi Netanyahu came here to speak. And while he was disgusting, I have to say I found our representatives to be more disgusting. They were like the people in the Colosseum in Rome cheering, watching a Christian getting ripped to shreds by a lion, raise, 58 standing ovations, which was a total embarrassment. I don't know how no one in the world will ever listen to us again on human rights or anything else until we renounce this. Um, so she wasn't there for that, but then she met with Netanyahu. And then she claimed she'd given him a really hard time. And she said that it's deplorable and how it's so disturbing to see these people killed. I don't think she cares, and she's not going to change the policy. And then she told students who were bringing it up that if they didn't shut up, it was going to get Trump elected. And I have to say, this Trump derangement syndrome, and I'm not endorsing a presidential candidate. I don't feel we have someone running for president who's actually a statesman as our nation requires. I do think if the Democrats win, we probably will not survive. And therefore, I am very dedicated to making sure that they lose. However, supposing Trump, Kennedy, I don't know, someone we don't know of yet, ends up winning the election, we're going to have to work our rear ends off to make just avoiding nuclear war is not enough. How do you get a policy of justice? How do you get a policy where someone can stand up to the British Empire, which is operating through the Zionist lobby? So she said, oh, well, if you don't stop it, Trump will win, as if that's worse than nuclear war. I guess some of these people think it is. Um, and then the other question on the uncommitted vote, this is really interesting. In the state of New York, they didn't cover it, but there was an uncommitted movement, except you can't vote uncommitted. That's not on the ballot. So what people did is they went to the April 2nd Democratic presidential primary. They signed in, they took a ballot, and then they voted for no one. Now, at the Board of Elections, they just tallied the votes to come up to 100% and ignored what you call the blank vote. We had to file a FOIL, a Freedom of Information request, to find out what the blank vote was. It was 13%. So even in New York, you had a 13% Democratic vote against genocide for none of the above, which is a very big deal.
Yeah, I believe most people are against it. We're just dealing with hundreds and hundreds of media companies that are pretty much paid out to push that line. We have a question here from one of your supporters. Art, please ask candidate Sarah anything you like.
Hi, Diane.
Hi.
So I had a lot of fun out there campaigning near the United Nations and on your fight to keep that hospital in New York City open. I wanted to ask something that's a little bit different because it's on my mind and it should be on the mind of a lot of other people. I'm sure you're aware of the fact that two of our veteran astronauts are now up on the space station. They were sent up there on this Boeing Starliner craft, and because Boeing is apparently, totally incompetent, they can't get back. And somebody made the point that maybe they could get the Russians to send their spaceship up, and we used to rely on them because before the SpaceX was able to send astronauts up there. And so what do you think, what's your take on this whole fiasco that's going on with the space station and the space program in general?
Well, in this case, I think if Boeing were to be retooled to actually produce things that are good for civilization, there would be a higher level of morale, and probably people wouldn't put up with these crooks that have taken over the company. As you've seen, a lot of the Boeing planes have had a lot of problems, doors flying open and things like that. I have to say, I don't know who makes our B-35 or F-35 bombers, but I think 18 of them basically crashed or malfunctioned, and they were spending hundreds of millions of dollars. So it just, this is what happens when a bunch of amoral, greedy, arrogant bastards take over. Um, obviously, of course, we were using the Russian rockets to get our astronauts to the International Space Station for years. I'm sure Russia would be willing to help us, even as despicably as we have been treating them, and we should. And so they haven't been covering it because I think Americans would be pretty upset to know that 2 of our people are stuck up there on the space station and unable to get down thanks to the incompetence of Boeing.
Yeah, and it's physically very unsafe for them because they're not in without gravity. It also changes many of the body's organs, including the orbital socket and the eye itself. Excuse me, Diane. We'll see you next on the campaign. Is there any last word you'd like to have? We'll let people know what your website is, and please have the last word. And we will sign out and thank our audience here and those watching.
Well, thanks very much. I'm just waiting for the dam to break. I'm wondering how much more the American people are willing to put up with. Unfortunately, they are being bombarded by disinformation, so I appreciate, Ian, your help in the video sphere to get content to people and help them to learn the truth of what's going on. So that's what I have to say, and I just want to thank you very much, and I trust you to get out my website.
You've been listening to candidate for U.S. Senate in New York, Diane Sare, and the Live1.TV Town Hall. You can follow Diane's campaign by going to sareforsenate.com. And don't forget to follow Live1.TV, accurate source of information on government, politics, and art.